How's it going, guys, and welcome once again to the Foot and Fist Sports Network, where today we're going to be talking about UFC 206's fight fallout. And let me tell you, UFC 206 might have been the best card of the year. Now, we're not just talking about like how big or how high profile the fighters were, but we're talking about pure brilliance in the cage and how spectacular and entertaining they were. And let me tell you, UFC 206 did not disappoint. A lot of times when you get these huge cards like UFC 205 and things like that, where they're so stacked and they have so many great fighters on there, it happens to where they aren't as good as we hope because we have so much expectation on those specific guys that are so popular and stuff like that. We expect them to go in there and completely blow us away with how good they are. Whereas at UFC 206, there were quite a few guys that weren't necessarily like huge names, like Cub Swanson, Dooho Choi, guys that are popular, but they aren't like expected to be this kind of monsters type of thing. They aren't the highest level of fighter, who go out there and they just destroy each other and have amazing fights. And that's exactly what UFC 206 did. They had some big name guys like Cowboy, who put on one hell of a fight, and Matt Brown as well, obviously. And there were some other guys who were lesser names that put on great fights as well. So this was just a great card all around. And let's go ahead and jump straight into it, talking about Tim Kennedy. Now, Tim Kennedy is probably my favorite American. From everything he does, hunting Hitler and all that stuff, I love that stuff. So it was very hard for me, or not really hard, but it was sad to me to see him get beat up that badly by Kelvin Gastelum. Now, alright, he has a lot of things outside the octagon that probably make him way more money than he does inside the octagon. So I don't think that there's really any need for him to be fighting anymore unless he just plain wants to. And considering that he's a special forces kind of guy, and based on how his personality is and things like that, I'm expecting this loss to have pushed him and made him want to fight one more time to avenge, at least end on a high note, end his career on a high note. I think he will fight one more time, and the perfect person for him to fight is Anderson the Spider Silva. Why? Well, because Anderson Silva hasn't been having a great run as of late. Let's just be honest right now. He's lost a few fights in a row. His fight with Nick Diaz was tainted by the whole supplement thing, and I think that fighting Tim Kennedy would be a good option for both guys, because a win for Tim Kennedy would be a huge way to end his career and possibly get himself back in the title contention if he really does want to make one more title push, whereas Anderson Silva would be in the same exact type of situation. With a win over Tim Kennedy, who has a win over Bisping, who has a win over Romero, he could be right back up there in the mix for a title shot, because we know Anderson Silva wants to keep going. So it'll be interesting to see what the UFC does decide to do with Tim Kennedy, and most importantly, if he does want to fight one more time. I think that if he does, that is the best option. Otherwise, maybe a fight with Vitor Belfort, because they don't like each other. Tim Kennedy's been very vocal about how much he hates him, so it'd be a good fight to make as well. Now I want to talk about the winner of their matchup, which was Kelvin Gastelum, and I was very impressed with Kelvin fighting at 185. I thought he was going to be severely undersized, at least against a guy like Tim Kennedy, but he out-cardioed him, and he boxed him the fuck up. I mean, that was a great performance on the feet from Kelvin Gastelum. I was very, very impressed. Now, what to do with Kelvin Gastelum sort of depends on what he decides to do. If Dana White gives him one more chance to fight in the welterweight, then I would like to see him fight somebody around the top 6. So what the UFC is going to do next with Kelvin Gastelum really decides on where he's going to be fighting next. Will the UFC give him the opportunity to try one more time at welterweight, or will they force him to fight again at 185? Now, I have good options for either one. Now, if he fights at middleweight, which I think is probably his best choice, then I would like to see him fight Vitor Belfort, who needs a win, much like Anderson Silva. And a win over Kelvin Gastelum would be pretty big, because Kelvin Gastelum is a young up-and-comer who is doing very, very well, and Vitor needs a win. And a win over Kelvin Gastelum would be huge to reinstate him in the mix for a title shot. We're not really in title contention, but to get him back in the top 5, somewhere around there. Whereas if he goes down to welterweight, I want to see him fight somebody like Lorenz Larkin, who is also not a young fighter, but somebody who it has a lot of raw talent and could definitely test him. And I would like to see that fight happen, because I think it'd be very, very entertaining, and I want to see what Lorenz Larkin can do against somebody of Kelvin Gastelum's level. So that'd be a very good fight to see. Next up, I'm going to talk about Cub Swanson, who had a great performance against Dooho Choi, and let me tell you, that might be fight of the year. That was one of the best performances I have ever seen between those two guys, and Dooho Choi might have one of the best chins in MMA history. He took a beating, but he kept on coming. He even rocked Cub Swanson a couple times when Cub was hurt. It was just a great fight all around, and I was very impressed with Cub Swanson. Now, don't get me wrong, he had won his last 2 fights, but I thought he was a bit over the hill, and I was very happy to see him get back in the win column. What I would like to see him do now is get a rematch against Ricardo Lamas. The two of them fought in 2011, so it's been a good 5 years since they last fought, and it would obviously be in 2017 when they would have their rematch. And I think that Ricardo Lamas, who won recently, could definitely use a fight against Cub Swanson, who is a big name, pretty much at the same level as Ricardo Lamas, and the winner of that could definitely be in contention in the featherweight division, because we don't really know what Jose Aldo is going to do after he fights Max Holloway, if he does indeed fight Max Holloway. He apparently wants to go up to the lightweight and try to take on Conor McGregor there. So it's kind of obscure what's going to happen in the featherweight division, and I would like to see these two guys go at each other to sort of add one more legit contender to that weight class. Now I want to talk about Dooho Choi real quick, and let me tell you, like I said earlier when I was talking about Cub Swanson, I was extremely impressed by Dooho Choi. I was always impressed by his striking and stuff like that, but I didn't know that he had such a good chin that he could take so much punishment. I mean, he showed that he really is a warrior, and I would love to see him fight somebody on the periphery of the top 15. You know, somebody like Renan Barão, if you want to give him somebody who's a big name that could sort of match his caliber of stardom right now, or if you want to give him somebody who's a little less experienced and maybe a little less skilled, then give him Andre Touchy-Fili. I think that Touchy-Fili, he's very explosive. He's a very fun fighter, much like Dooho Choi, but he's not as good. But he does present the wrestling problem, which could definitely be a problem for Dooho Choi. So I think those are two very good matchups, very fun matchups, and I hope to see what the UFC comes up with for Dooho Choi, because I think this guy has a very, very big future ahead of him, and I would like to see him fight one of those two guys who could definitely bolster up his record and his name in a big way, you know, to push him to being a real legit top 10 featherweight in the world. Now I want to talk about Cowboy motherfucking Cerrone, who put on one of the best fights I have seen all year, and hats off also to Matt Brown, who I'll be talking about a little bit after this. But Cowboy Cerrone went out there and he fought a guy who has always been known as a very dangerous striker at welterweight. He's a big guy, and even though he's been on a bit of a skid lately, there's always been a lot of skill in Matt Brown. You know, he's always been one of those guys that can win or he can lose. A lot of times he loses, but he can definitely beat some of the top guys in the world with his Muay Thai. And it was always going to be tough for Cowboy, who predominantly likes to strike and has a similar style to Matt Brown. So it was always going to be a tough fight. And I was very happy to see how Donald Cerrone came back from getting rocked and then actually went out there and started pouring on Matt Brown, and even gained his respect and his appreciation to the point where Matt Brown, after all that trash talk and how he was like he thought that Cowboy was disrespectful and stuff like that, he finally got Matt Brown to hug him and give him a high five going into the third round, and then he knocked him out within 20 seconds, I think, but maybe even less actually. It said 4 minutes and 50 seconds, so it may have been late in the round. I don't quite remember, but I know it was definitely one hell of a knockout. A beautiful head kick, which he had actually landed quite a few times in the fight, but it eventually got to the point where Matt Brown couldn't take any more of that. Great fight from Cowboy. I want to see him fight Robbie Lawler next. I think that the winner of that could definitely get the next title shot. And I mean, Jesus Christ, can you imagine Cowboy Cerrone versus Robbie Lawler? That is a dream fight. That, I mean, as a fan, does it really get any better than that? Two guys that are going to fucking bring it, and two guys that are going to go to war, and we know that they can take a lot of damage, they can keep going, and I think it's going to be one hell of a fight, and that could be Fight of the Year 2017. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time, but I would love to see that fight happen. Everybody would agree. I think Dana White agrees with that as well, and that is the fight that I want to see happen next for Donald Cowboy Cerrone, and the winner will get the next title shot at the winner of Woodley versus Wonderboy Thompson, or Nick Diaz, apparently, all depending on what Woodley gets. Now I want to talk about Matt Brown real fast, and like I said, after the guy went on a pretty bad run of bad losses and bad performances in general, he looked great against Cowboy Cerrone. You can really see that he's been training a lot with Dwayne Ludwig, because his striking looks like a whole different level than it was before. And I mean, to be able to stand with Cowboy for 3 rounds, regardless of getting knocked out or not, that takes a lot of balls. That takes a lot of skill. You know, Matt Brown didn't try to grapple him or anything like that. He just tried to flat out strike with him. He did very well. He even hurt Cowboy. So I was very impressed with him there. Very impressed with Dwayne Ludwig as a coach. He's always been great, ever since his Team Alpha Male days. But doing that with Matt Brown against Donald Cowboy Cerrone was an amazing thing to do. So hats off to Matt Brown. And I want to see him take on somebody who's on the bottom, like somebody like Jorge Masvidal, just to give him somebody who's a little bit lower ranked. That way he can maybe get a win, get a good performance in there, and then see where he goes from there. Now I want to talk about the people that were in the main event of the evening. We're going to be talking about Anthony Pettis first. Now there's really only one thing that comes to mind that really interests me when it comes to Anthony Pettis. Now there's only one thing that really interests me when it comes to Anthony Pettis, and that is Michael Johnson. I mean, can you imagine a fight between him and Michael Johnson? It's going to be an all-stand-up fight because Michael Johnson, I don't think, would try to really grapple with him too much. I think he'd try to make it a boxing fight because that's where he does have a pretty big advantage over Anthony Pettis. One little thing that I've seen about Anthony Pettis is that his kicks are great and all that stuff, but his boxing isn't that good, and his boxing defense is definitely pretty bad. So I think that is a pretty big weakness in his game, apart from his wrestling, which has improved. I just think that he needs to work on his boxing defense really badly because he gets hit a lot, and that's a problem for somebody. For anybody, especially for somebody who's fighting in the top 5, top 10 every single time he fights. So that's going to be very exploitable, and Michael Johnson definitely could do that, but I think that Michael Johnson, if he could beat somebody like Anthony Pettis, or at least can compete with him very closely, then that would be huge for his career, especially after getting dominated like that by Khabib Nurmagomedov. And Anthony Pettis, who's lost quite a few fights now, needs to get somebody who's probably a little bit lower level than he is, and I think Michael Johnson would be a great choice for the UFC. And now I want to talk about Max motherfucking Holloway, the Hawaiian who went out there and destroyed Anthony Pettis with some beautiful shots. I mean, words can't describe how good Max Holloway is compared to when we saw him fight against Conor McGregor. When you look at those two guys, they have both improved so much, and I would love to see them fight against each other one more time, or maybe even another time if Max Holloway ends up winning that fight down the line. I think that Max Holloway has all the tools to beat Jose Aldo, and I think it would be a very, very good thing to see him be the champion because he's always fighting everybody. He's always open to that. He's now on a 9-fight win streak, so we know he has the balls to fight everybody, and he can beat just about anybody. And I think that he could definitely be another guy that could compete as a 2-division champion if they give him the opportunity to fight Conor McGregor in a rematch. I think that he's very entertaining. You see him on the Embedded series. He was very fun. He's got a lot of personality. He's got a good personality as well. He's got a lot of people behind him when it comes to like friends and stuff like that. He's just a very lovable guy, and that's something the UFC needs. He could definitely be a contrasting personality with Conor McGregor, and I think that would be a very interesting to see as they go forward. But I do think, like I said, that he will be able to beat Jose Aldo. It's not going to be easy, obviously. Jose, even though he got knocked out in 13 seconds, he's still a great fighter, and I think that's going to be one hell of a fight. And but that is without a doubt the next fight for Max Holloway if Jose wants to take it and doesn't want to move up to and just basically fight Conor McGregor, which is what he apparently wants to be doing anyway. So that's it for the video, guys. Let me know in the comment section down below who you want to see each of these fighters take on. Let me know who you were most impressed with. Was it Max Holloway? Was it Cowboy Cerrone? Was it Cub Swanson? You let me know. I'm very curious to see what each one of you guys think about those fights. And if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and please subscribe to the channel. Please share it with any MMA fans that you know, and if you want to help me out, then definitely subscribe to the channel like I said earlier. And guys, I will see you in the next video. I don't know when the next UFC card is, but there will always be coverage, and if there's any big news in the coming days, then I'll be covering it. Check out some of my soccer videos as well if you're interested in that kind of stuff, and I will see you in my next video.